Welcome to the Green Building Resource Center, which is actually down there behind you. Feel free to peruse it before you leave. You're now in the Houston Permitting Center. Our space upstairs, I capped it at 75, and we got to 100, and so we moved it down here. So this is a little roomier, and it's kind of fun. Yeah. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce Keith Reel, past chair of the U.S. Green Building Council chapter here. He's got a couple of things to talk about, and then we'll take it away.
Thank you, Steve. So hopefully everybody's signed in. Everybody's got some yummy food. And by the way, our sponsor, Hunton, has paid for all that. So if you're in the air conditioning industry, so thank you to Hunton for doing that. I didn't have lunch today, so I'm looking forward to chowing down here in a minute. And so thank you again. One quick question. How many people in here are USGBC chapter members? Okay. And, you know, I actually thought I was a member, and then I went and checked it out, and my membership had lapsed, and I forgot. So if you know, that's how we are able to afford a lot of the things we do. So if you would become a member, we'd love to have you. Love to have you at events no matter what. As the chair said, you know, the parking's free if you're a member. And I talked to some people, so everybody's free today, okay? And so actually, Steve talked to some people, really. So that was pretty much it. We have a great panel here today, and you know, look forward to having some good discussions. Steve's going to take over here in just a second. But again, restrooms are where, Steve? So they're over here. So try not to leave puddles under your chair is what I always say. So give a hoot. And then if you need to leave, or if your phones, please put them on, as I say, I'm an engineer, so I could say this, put them on stun instead of, you know, ringing or anything like that, so that we, you know, can have everything that way. And I'm trying to think anything else. I guess, you know, if you need to get something to drink, or you need to get your phone, you know, you can step outside or in the back or whatever. And otherwise, enjoy the panel. And Steve, I'll let you kind of tee it up and talk a little bit about Drawdown, and then we'll have a nice discussion. Thanks for coming. Really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Keith. So anyway, I've been, just so you know, I've been waiting for this book since about, I'm a big fan of Paul Hawken. In, what, 98 or something, he wrote The Ecology of Commerce. And then he teamed up with Amory and Hunter Lovins and wrote Natural Capitalism. And then after 2000s, he wrote Blessed Unrest. And so I think about 2013 or 14, there was a Stay Tuned coming, Drawdown, the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming. So I've been waiting and you know, it kind of went past. I thought it was going to be 2015, and then it was 2016, and then May 18th, boom, there it was. So I was, you know, downloading it on Kindle from Amazon and starting with it, and ordered a couple of copies, and started giving them away, and kind of preparing myself for when did I want to have an event. So here we are. I started way back at the other end of the room. I started with a display of Drawdown, and so I shot Paul Hawken an email with a picture of that. He went, wow, that's cool. Can you give me a high res? So then I had somebody else take another picture and send him a high res, and he's pretty happy about that. So now we'll have an event, and that's going to be a lot of fun. Basically, the guy is so positive. So he kind of starts off with this graph. I was on a webinar and was doing screenshots of the slides that he had, and this is one of them. So he goes, so here we are, carbon in the atmosphere jumping up after 1950. And so he wanted to kind of point out that a lot of the, of course, global warming recommendations are not, you know, so much fun. They're kind of negative, and he really wanted to talk solutions, which I thought was a great idea. So Scientific American Union of Concerned Scientists: forego fossil fuels, move closer to work, consume less, be efficient, eat smart, kind of all these, kind of things. And change the car you drive, make your house airtight, which is not a bad thing. You can save money by doing that. Use power strips in home entertainment center, wash clothes in cold water, buy less stuff. So, he wanted to do something that would be a little bit helpful. So let's start out with what is drawdown. In atmospheric terms, drawdown is that point in time at which greenhouse gases peak and begin to decline on a year-to-year basis. So that is what drawdown means. So the reason why I have all these words on a slide, which is slide suicide, is because, somebody may want to see this after the presentation. And those slides where you didn't have any words or anything, then the person who's checking it out later is going, what's that mean? I don't get it. So I put these in. So I'm going to read it. But in conducting our research, we found a plan, a blueprint that already exists in the world in the form of humanity's collective wisdom, made manifest in applied, hands-on practices and technologies that are commonly available, economically viable, and scientifically valid. Individual farmers, communities, cities, companies, and governments have shown that they care about this planet, its people, and its places. Engaged citizens the world over are doing something extraordinary. This is their story. That's a quote from the book. Yeah. Yeah, I'm pretty big in quoting the book and not trying to put a Steve spin on things, so it's coming kind of straight from the horse's mouth. So these are the fellows, the drawdown fellows. You got a bunch of postdocs and, really smart college people and in the profession to kind of work at deep discounts to work in their area of expertise and crunch all these numbers, okay? So here they are. A lot of them are from nonprofits, a lot of them are from academia, all kinds of different people, which you can't read all these, so, So they are going to do the math. That's kind of the whole idea, and come up with these numbers. And so, for instance, here we go, rooftop solar, okay? Isn't that great? We all know that solar is going somewhere, and it's going to be very helpful. We all want solar to be better. That is the 10th, ranked number 10 for potential for drawdown, okay? So he's got 100. 80 of them are, like he said, already kind of there, and 20 of them are stretch goals. So I'll get into that. So there's number 10 rank, and then it has how many gigatons of CO2 it's going to reduce, the cost, and then the net savings. So when you read the book, you'll kind of get into this. And the chapters, each one of these chapters is like a page and a half. So it's really great. It's a synopsis. You don't have to get into a whole bunch of just incredibly complicated gobbledygook and get a headache. It's really, really great writing. So household recycling, that's number 55. Okay, so we're halfway into the second, halfway through the list. So you would think, wow, I thought we were going to be able to really, really make a lot of progress with recycling. Well, it's helpful, and it's going to reduce 2.77 gigatons globally, which is good. Number 4, our plant-rich diet is 66 gigatons. So, we're in double digits, a lot of gigatons of CO2. Marine permaculture is one of those stretch ones that's not really established yet. Building with wood, again, is another stretch one. And so, interestingly, out of the top 20, the food ones are 8 of the top 20. So, since I was a big fan of The Soil Will Save Us, I wasn't really surprised to see this, but food takes a lot of carbon-intensive process to get all the food we want all over the place. And so then this was pretty interesting. This was his graphic that he had of the various categories. So he tried to have large buckets with these 100 items, and of course you're not going to be able to read the small ones, but we have food, and then next is electricity generation. Then we have land use, women and girls, materials, and then buildings and cities. And so, okay, I'm just going to have to like make a thing about this because I really thought that buildings and cities was going to be bigger. But what he did was he separated out the electricity generation, and buildings and cities need a lot of electricity. Okay? So, you know, wind turbines and solar farms and rooftop solar and geothermal and nuclear and all these things that generate energy, a lot of it's going to buildings. So anyway, it was kind of a stretch. And so I don't feel so bad about buildings and cities being smaller, but when you read the book, you'll understand why he did that. Because, you know, being a U.S. Green Building Council person, you know, we all kind of know when we're become a lead AP that buildings are responsible for 40% of primary energy use and 72% of electricity consumption, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of why I was expecting the buildings and cities number to be bigger, but he had to do those separations, okay? And, you know, with the 39% of carbon dioxide emissions, you know, I thought it was going to be a bigger thing. Okay. So anyway, what is a gigaton? So interestingly, I thought, well, you know, what is this? How big is a ton of a gas? Or how much, you know, is that like carbon dioxide? How big is that when you get 2,000 pounds of that? Is it in gas, liquid CO2, or, you know, dry ice? What is that? So then I just went to Wikipedia, and so a ton is actually quite vague. It's either weight, volume, or then there's tons of air conditioning, right? Okay, so it's thermal. So it's like ton is kind of all over the map. So anyway, and also guess what? It has to do with the particular compound that you're measuring. So a ton of CO2 is different than a ton of oxygen, which is different than a ton of methane. So you got to be a scientist to really kind of understand this. But at any rate, so what is a gigaton? To appreciate its magnitude, imagine 400,000 Olympic-sized pools. That is about 1 billion metric tons of water, or 1 gigaton. So anyway, then he goes on. Now multiply that by 36, yielding 14,400,000 pools, and 36 billion tons is the amount of carbon dioxide we emitted last year. So he's always kind of bringing into the present, which is great. So the idea of the book is to have the total net cost and operation savings, and the amount needed to purchase, install, and operate it over 30 years. And by comparing this to what we typically would spend on food, fuel for cars, heating and cooling for our homes, et cetera, we determine the net cost or savings from investing in a given solution. So then I pulled this off the internet, and this was just to kind of give a feel for where we are right now. Gigatons of CO2 to the left that we added from 1850 to 1999, so to the turn of the century, that's, 1,010 gigatons. So I mean, when you say we emitted 36 gigatons last year, then so compared to what? Okay, so the first big collection was the Industrial Revolution to the new millennium, again, 1,010. So then from 2000 to 2015, we added another 500 gigatons. So we ramped it up. Why? Because, the third world is advancing, okay? And then how much more can we safely release in the opinions of scientists? 335. So we're, at a click of 36, we got like 10 years clicking along at this rate. And then there's this other argument about how much we have left to release, what's in the ground, blah, blah, blah. So that was kind of interesting. So then this, of course, you can't read these. This is the list at the back of the book of the 100 solutions ranked from, 1 down to 80. And then he just kind of mentions those 20 stretch ones at the end of the book, too. And interestingly, you get down to about 27 district heating, which is right behind electric vehicles. And then we go into single digits of gigatons. So any math nerds, anybody who kind of likes comparing numbers, you're going to love this. And then, meanwhile, the pictures are fantastic in the book, and again, the writing is very clear. So this is one of the slides that was really great. It shows the pie chart of the various things. You see refrigeration, wind turbines, reduced food waste, and plant-rich diet. See the big four, that's what we're going to be talking about today. And then we start getting smaller, and then, you get to other, and other would be too many words to try to have on a pie chart. So, but the point is we need to be doing all of them in order to move forward, because everybody's got their own contribution. So then the language that he wants to avoid is fighting, combating the climate battle, climate crusade, slash emissions, the carbon war room. He wants to not do all that. And so they sought to make Drawdown understandable to people from all backgrounds and points of view. We endeavored to bridge the climate communication gap by the words we choose, the analogies we avoid, the jargon we stay away from, and the metaphors we employ. And this is, and when you read it, and show of hands, people who've taken this on and started trying to read it, you're agreeing with this? Just kind of wave your hand if, okay, good. So I'm not a lunatic. This is great stuff.
You're not a lunatic.
Oh, thank you, appreciate that. As much as possible, we refrain from acronyms and lesser-known climate terminology. We generally spell out carbon dioxide instead of abbreviating it, and we write methane, not CH4. So there you have it. So their goal is to present climate science and solutions in language that is accessible and compelling to the broadest audience, from ninth graders to pipe fitters, from graduate students to farmers. We also avoid using military language. I kind of appreciate that. Much of the rhetoric and writing about climate change is violent. The war on carbon, the fight against global warming, and frontline battles against fossil fuels. Articles refer to slashing emissions as if we had machetes. So it's kind of nice. It really is. So I'm kind of feeling like it's going to be a little too much if I get into this, so I'm going to skip this slide. And meanwhile, the quantitative results shown in the pages of Drawdown represent the total impact of each solution modeled over a 30-year period using reasonable yet optimistic forecasts for their global rate of growth. We call this a plausible scenario. If we apply this method, the total amount of carbon dioxide avoided and sequestered is 1,051 gigatons by 2050. So the reason I had that slide is because we already had this, 1,010 gigatons since 1850 to 1999, and the 500 more after that. So this is what Drawdown can do. It can take us right back to kind of a livable atmosphere situation. Next. Now, Michael Skelly is wind turbines. He's going to talk about that. He doesn't have a slide presentation, so that allows me to go scurry away and fix this, and you will have presentation going on, okay? So with that, I'm going to just bring up Michael Skelly, and I'm going to take the laptop and go fix this, okay? All right. Can I get a round of applause? Michael Skelly.
All right, thank you, Steve. So let me just talk a little bit about sort of where we are with wind energy in Texas and nationally. It's great to see that we're number 2 in the pie chart. That got my attention. And by way of sort of quick introduction, I've been involved, as Steve said, in developing wind farms around the country for the last 15 years. And now our company, Clean Line Energy, is working on long-distance direct current transmission lines to move wind energy from places where it's really windy to places where they need renewable energy. So where we are today is we get about 6% of U.S. electricity from wind power. That's up from, well, around 0% when you and I first met. It was a little more than 0, but it wasn't a lot. And in fact, I remember coming to Houston in around 2000, and everybody was working downtown with this really cool company with this big E out front. And I'm trying to do wind turbines, thinking, man, this feels kind of silly compared to all this other stuff these people are doing. But it turned out that the wind really sort of began to take off in the late 90s, and now it's a big part of the or a bigger and bigger part of the energy equation in the United States. We're getting close to 15% of our electric power in Texas coming from wind. And on a sort of mild spring or fall day when the wind is blowing in West Texas, we've hit days when we're at about half of our electric power in Texas on an instantaneous basis. Yeah. Coming from wind energy, and that's driven by there's some tax incentives. Those are going to fade out beginning in 2020. That's been part of it, but the big thing that's really driven wind is big improvements in technology. And speaking of volumes of gases, so one of my favorite stats about wind, and Javier can verify this, but if you take the volume of air moving through the plane of a big turbine, it's a lot of energy. In fact, the volume of air is about 150 tons per second of air traveling through the plane. So what a wind turbine does is it grabs that energy, turns it into mechanical energy, spins a gearbox, which then spins a generator, which makes the electricity, and it goes off to the grid and so on. So there's a lot of energy in the air, particularly when it's moving quickly, and it moves pretty quick in Texas and really throughout the center of the country, and with many other places for wind. And today's state-of-the-art wind turbine generates typically about 2,500 kilowatts of power. So think of that as times 10, so that's 25,000. Is that 25? No, 25,000 100-watt light bulbs. I guess we don't have 100-watt light bulbs anymore, but it's a lot of power that a big turbine can generate. New turbines, the rotor diameter, and if you've been out to West Texas lately, you've seen these, is typically 110, 120 meter rotor diameter, and all of this sits on top of a tower, which is 80 to 90 meters tall. So big machines, and increasingly, as machines have gotten bigger, they've gotten more and more cost effective. You can generate wind for close to, if you take the tax incentives out of it and so on, it's around 3 cents a kilowatt hour, which is a little bit more expensive than sticking more gas in a gas-fired turbine, which is the way that the other big source of energy in Texas. But increasingly cost effective, and those of us who've been in the industry for a while, every year we think, oh man, these machines, they can't get any bigger or better or more efficient, and sure enough they do. So a lot of exciting stuff happening there. In Texas will be probably at 20%, getting close to 25% in the next decade or so of our electricity coming from wind, and nationally will be in the low double digits in the next 8 years or so. Let me talk a little bit about solar. Solar is, as we saw on the slide, rooftop solar is, it's pretty interesting. I have solar panels on my roof thanks to Steve's encouragement. Thank you, Steve. But where we're really seeing a lot of very cost-effective solar is large arrays, multi-megawatt arrays of solar facilities, and those costs have plummeted in the last, really in the last 5 years or so. And in sunny parts of Texas, again, with tax incentives, you're less than 3 cents a kilowatt hour, and if you didn't have incentives, it would be around 4 cents a kilowatt hour. So very, very cost-effective form of energy, and getting cheaper as well. All the rage in electric power right now is batteries, because battery costs are coming down, driven by these things that we all carry around in our pockets. That's huge amounts of batteries have been made over the last decade, and now with electric mobility coming along, that's driving continuous cost improvements on the battery side. We're all trying to, in the electric power space, we're all trying to figure out what to do with batteries and what are the roles that they'll play on the grid. Is it to move energy around? Is it for reserves? Is it for backup generation? The joke that they tell in the storage industry is batteries are like sex in middle school. Everybody's talking about it, but nobody really knows what it's all about. So batteries are something to look for over the next 10 years, and we're going to see a lot of exciting developments there. And again, this is driven by mass production. It turns out that when you build a lot of something, the costs come down. And then let me just touch briefly on the grid. The grid is maybe the biggest challenge in making all this happen, because we have a grid that was generally built where we, either through a pipeline system, we move natural gas to an area where we burn it and make electricity, or we use trains to transport coal to a power plant near a city, and that's how we would move our fuel around. With wind especially, but to some extent with solar, you want to move it great distances, and the grid that we have today wasn't really built for the task at hand. So, and we have a lot of archaic rules about how to build transmission lines, who's planning them, who's paying them for them, et cetera. And our company and a few others out there are trying to crack that nut as well. So that's a quick snapshot on what's happening in renewable energy, and delighted to. I think we go to questions at some point here, right, Steve? Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, now Jonathan is actually substituting for Chad Fancher tonight, so I don't quite have his introductory material. So I'm going to let you kind of, just tell him, who you are and why you're doing what you do. Okay?
So I'm Jonathan Michael with Rapid Recovery. We do refrigeration abatement. So essentially, anytime a HVAC contractor or a demolition company comes across an air conditioner system, or the grocery stores with your ice cream and your produce, anytime they have to do repairs, the EPA says that they have to remove the refrigerant to keep the refrigerant from being vented into the air. So that is what we do. In 2016, we recovered 7 billion pounds of carbon equivalents, and through that, we send it back to our reclamation centers in Phoenix, Arizona, and Bowling Green, Ohio, where they are sent through a process of being purified, the non-condensables, oils and water and such removed, and repackaged, resold, or destroyed for carbon credits. So that's kind of what we do on the backside. So these refrigerants are everywhere. They're all around us. Inside of these here are data cooling units for data centers. So there's just a few ounces of refrigerant inside of those, and we'll go out and we'll get that refrigerant removed, and just ounces at a time, and it adds up to the billions of pounds. Here was actually a solar farm in California, if I'm not mistaken, where we recovered 65,000 pounds of refrigerant in about 18 hours. Trying to get away from the marketing stuff. So starting this year, the EPA, they're going to get more stricter, and they want more accountability on the refrigerant. And before, it was kind of, if it wasn't a lot of refrigerant, less than 50 pounds, the contractor wasn't really required to keep track of the model, the serial number, the refrigerant, actual poundage that's inside the system, and the disposal of the appliances such as your refrigerators, your window, we call them windows, your window units that go inside your house, the water fountains that's inside buildings. Those little bitty appliances, they add up to thousands and thousands of pounds of carbon equivalents. So now that we're going to be required to keep track of all that, and so that there's a line of accountability so that we can catch those that aren't doing what they're supposed to do and releasing those refrigerants into the air. So what refrigerants are affected? Ozone depleting refrigerants, when they're released into the air, if you don't know, they kill the oxygen molecules inside the ozone. Currently subject to the Section 608 vending prohibition. It is illegal. It's $36,000 fine per day per incident when you're caught. So anybody that handles refrigerant, we do have to be EPA certified. There's a testing process and a class that has to go through with that. So now our focus and what I do is we actually go out and we remove these refrigerants for, say, a grocery store, and they're taking out old ozone depleting substances and they're replacing them with these HFOs and PFCs. They're more environmentally friendly, and they're also more cost effective for the stores and the end user. Some other stuff. So you must be a 608 certified technician to open HFC appliances starting the 1st of 2018. And this is any, these R134 and 410A is in most common household air conditioning, and most likely in the air conditioning and comfort cooling in this building here. You must be a Section 608 certified technician now to purchase these refrigerants. Before anybody could purchase them, you just walk in, tell them you needed it. So now that's going towards the accountability of keeping track of who's buying these refrigerants and where it's ending up, and the whole chain of command there. Technicians must be certified to recovery and or recycle equipment when opening a HFC appliance. Technicians must evacuate to the specified levels of vacuum when opening HFC appliances. Newly manufactured or imported recovery and or recycling equipment models must be certified for use with HFCs. So we have our recovery equipment that we use to move the refrigerant from these units to cylinders, and we custom make these in-house, and then before we can ever put these out in the field to be used, they have to be escorted by EPA to a third-party facility to be tested and AHRI certified before we can ever use them. Leak rate starting 1/2019, these modified leak rate requirements will apply to all refrigerants. So these stores, I say stores, grocery stores mainly, they have leak rates where they can, a certain percentage of refrigerant is allowed to be leaked just because of the sheer volume and size of these units, and they're going to start being more stricter on these rates, and it's going to, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. And so the stores are required to keep track of every time the refrigerant's removed and when they put it in, so that they can determine these leak rates and fix them and correct them as they come up. So the revised leak rate thresholds is 30% for industrial process refrigeration, which was lowered from 35%, 20% for commercial refrigeration, lowered from 35%, and 10% for comfort cooling. Certified technician must perform a leak inspection to identify the necessary repairs. The repair must bring the appliance leak rate below the threshold. Going into the testing. So appliances, leak rate, record keeping. So now, before there was, the contractors, they would get these units that they would get from jobs, from different sites, and they would just take the refrigerant out, and they would take it to a supply house, and there was no record keeping of it. So now technicians are going to be required to provide owners and operators with invoices, including the amount of refrigerant added and results of leak inspections and verification testing or test. So appliances with less than 5 pounds of refrigerant see the new requirements: the company name, location of the appliance, the date of the recovery, the type of refrigerant. The EPA is establishing reclamation standards for HFCs and other refrigerants contained. By promoting the proper handling of refrigerants, EPA anticipates an annual GHG reduction of 7.3. Ooh, somebody want to help me out with that? Thank you.
I think it's a million metric tons.
Million metric. As I recently learned, that is quite a lot. The EPA estimates 44 million in savings from reduced purchases of refrigerants. EPA has exempt certain hydrocarbon refrigerants from the venting prohibition. When used in specific appliances as a consequence of 608 requirements. These are new self-contained small appliances specifically designed to use hydrocarbon refrigerants. The EPA does not anticipate that opening such appliances for servicing or recharging will be common. Such appliances are identified by red tubings and marking. It is illegal to use hydrocarbon or other flammable refrigerants such as R22A in existing HFC appliances. This is true whether the refrigerant is sold to a certified technician or not. So now reporting on all appliances greater than 5 pounds, technicians are now responsible and held accountable. Contractors, including scrappers, must collect data and must be able to report monthly. Scrappers must provide make, model, serial number, or ID to the service technician for all removed equipment. Wholesalers must provide docs for all recovery cylinders to contractors who must tie back their recovery. Reclaimers must provide documentation down the chain. So with rapid recovery, every rapid recovery technician is EPA certified. All of our proprietary recovery equipment is already certified. Rapid recovery, our documentation exceeds all the EPA requirements. A little bit about us. So yeah, I'll do it. Thank you.
All right. Now, one of the things that I'm going to go ahead and jump in here with a refrigerant aha moment. I had my my air conditioner went down about a month ago. So I called my AC guy, and he comes out, and I've got a problem with the condenser up in the attic. And he says, well, you had a leak, and you lost your refrigerant. And I'm going, and I hadn't read that chapter yet, okay? But I went, uh-oh, this is going to be an acid test. So he goes, okay, so I filled it with 4 pounds. Okay. So the scary thing, and then, you know, read the chapter, and the problem with refrigerants is it's 1,000 to 9,000 times more of a greenhouse gas problem than carbon dioxide. So, I mean, I thought methane was it. It's only 30 times worse than CO2. But here's greenhouse gas capacity of refrigerants. That is quite an order of magnitude worse. So I took the average, right? So 5,000 times worse than carbon times 4 is 20,000 pounds basically. So divided by 2,000 for tons, it's 10 tons. And then I looked up, some sort of meaningful, like what's 10 tons of CO2? Well, that's 2 cars annual. So that little leak on my air conditioner was worth 2 cars a year. So that kind of gave me a little bit of a feel for why this could potentially be number one, worst one, a few leaks of this refrigerant that's all over the place in all kinds of machines, and cars and houses and grocery stores. And these guys are licensed, and there's a law that says that we need to recover this stuff, and it's starting to fall into place. So it was a total aha moment for a really great chapter. So moving on, so we started with 2, go back to 1. Now 3 is going to be food waste, and we've got Scott Snodgrass who's going to talk about this. He's a partner with the Edible Group, and he's at least 4th generation Texan, has lived in Houston for most of his life. He is passionate about seeing viable systems for local food production thrive. Scott has spent time in the garden center, landscaping, and restaurant industries, as well as farming, certified organic, and education. He is excited to see high-quality produce grown in urban areas and made available to all people. So, Scott, come on up.
It worked. All right. Well, thank you all for being here and for having me out to speak today. I just wanted to start by saying that Pat Greer has some wonderful food in the back. And since I'm talking about food waste, if any of it's left when I leave this place, then you haven't heard me today at all. So here to give me an introduction, the Edible Group's small suite of companies, all small businesses based here in Houston. Edible Earth Resources is our oldest company and does edible landscaping for homeowners and restaurants. And then Agmenity is a company we started about 2 years ago, and it manages farms where community is also a part of the agricultural operations. So we work with homeowners associations, master plan developers, institutions like hospitals and schools to develop agricultural amenities, thus Agmenity. My business partner was really proud when he came up with the name. And then Loam Agronomics is our 300-acre vegetable farm in Richmond in Fort Bend County. So we're right between Katy and Sugar Land, if you're down in that area. And we just started that one about a year ago. So I want to start first by saying that most of the items that I'm going through in this slide today come from the Food and Agricultural Organization's report in 2011, so it's actually been a while. And since this report came out, there's been significant movements, specifically in Europe, less so in the United States, but moving towards reducing food waste. And so, as you saw in the slides that Steve showed earlier, food is all-encompassing in our lives because everybody does it. Not everybody has a car. Most people, at least in our society, deal with refrigerants, but much of the world doesn't. And so, there are significant parts of the world that are contributing to greenhouse gas that don't even have electrical grids, but we all do food. And so it's not necessarily that the food system is so dense in the hydrocarbons that it's using, but I think it's just that it is encompassing across the entire world. And so the report came out, there's a big movement going on called Wasted, but it's Waste Ed, like education about waste. And they did their national conference was, I think, like 5 or 6 months ago, and it was in London. And a few of the chefs that I follow on Instagram were there. And it was interesting to see that for the entire conference, they were not allowed to purchase any food products for any of the meals, and they served 3 meals a day to everyone who came. And so it was all byproduct food. So they had to get everything for free, and it had to be something that wasn't worth selling. And they went and created food out of that. So if you're familiar with Chef Dan Barber, who's at Blue Hill Restaurant in New York and the Stone Barns Agricultural Center, he was a big part of that, and so it was interesting to watch his Instagram account. So first we need to go through the food supply chain. There's a lot of steps to it. First is the actual agricultural production, so that's what we do at Loam Agronomics. We grow vegetables there. And so in each of these, you're going to see a few ways that maybe loss could actually happen in those areas. And so first is just mechanical damage, depending on the crop you're harvesting. If it's a potato or something underground, we have to first dig that out somehow, and inevitably you'll lose a significant portion there. And then spillage, contamination even, if we harvest a crop and it goes into a bin that we later find out was potentially contaminated, then we have to get rid of all that. And the Food Safety Modernization Act that the Food and Drug Administration is implementing in the next couple of years covers a lot of those things and is going to lead to more food waste in those areas, but probably for good reason. Then post-harvest handling and storage, so this is cleaning, getting it into a cooler and storing it, and we do that on our site as well. Then processing, if it's a product that's being turned into something else, it goes to a factory and is processed, and inevitably there's food waste there. Sometimes that's spoilage. Other times it may be removing a part of the food that is still edible, but isn't being used in that process. So if you're making potato chips, but you're taking the skin off first, then we have the waste of those potato peels. Then in distribution, which actually in our current food system, this is a significant portion of the loss in distribution because we move food so far right now. And then finally, consumption, which is the part that you have a more direct hand in, is another area. So the FAO reports goes into detail about the difference between food losses and food waste. I'm not going to make that differentiation, but generally the way they look at it is food loss is something that happens in the food supply chain before it reaches a consumer's decision making. And food waste is what happens due to the consumer's decision. So you may be contributing to food waste in a grocery store, even though you never actually buy the product. And so they include some of that retail spoilage in that category as well. But I'm going to use both terms interchangeably today, so forgive me for that. Some of the charts, I just pulled a few out. There were hundreds in the report, and I pulled a few out that were more interesting than others. And so first, it's interesting to look at, this is just the total per capita food loss in the world. And so this is looking at the red being the consumer's decision-making leading to the waste, and the blue being indirectly the food system itself leading to waste. So you can see in North America, where we're included here, that it's actually a little bit more than a third of the food waste happens at the consumer side. What you'll see in less developed regions is that people need food, they don't have much food, so they don't waste food. But where you do have the losses is that they don't have good refrigeration, they don't have good transportation systems, maybe they're relying on a truck that's supposed to drive through their town and pick things up, and then that truck doesn't ever show up. And so that's where we see most of that loss coming in. And so you can see in the United States, we are almost 300 kilograms a year per person in food waste. And so that's a significant amount of waste. Then if you go look at commodity by commodity, it's pretty interesting as well. So fruits and vegetables are one where the consumer has a lot to do with it. We buy vegetables, we assume how much we're going to cook at home that week. We get busy, we end up throwing things out. And so there's significant waste there as well. But you can see that it's actually a little bit more than half of the fruits and vegetables that are grown in the United States are actually never consumed. Meats, people don't like to throw meat away. It's more expensive, and so we see a little bit different behavior here. But in the United States, the consumer actually ends up throwing most of the meat away, and we'll go into those reasons why in a little bit. Cereals, grains, wheat, corn, breads, those sorts of things, most of it happens at the consumption side. You always buy that 5-pound bag of flour because you're going to bake a lot in the next month, and then, you bake once and that's it. And that bag sits there for a year and then you throw it away. Seafood, also a significant amount of loss happens at the consumer side. So you're starting to see in the United States, it seems to be about half our losses are on the consumer end for most of these, whereas in other countries, very, very little happens on the consumer end. Even in Europe, even in other industrialized nations, you still see less. So we do have a bit of a food culture problem. And then lastly, dairy, where the vast majority, we lose 20% of our dairy, but the vast majority of that is at the consumer side. Well, that's not showing all the way, but this is supposed to say that 40% of post-harvest total food supply in the world is wasted. And then this is supposed to say 1,250 calories are wasted per person per day in the United States. And so 1,500 calories right there, you're looking at a whole day's worth of meals and some snacks. That's about how much we're wasting per person every day. And so one of the things is, as an organic farmer that I often hear is, oh, well, that's cute that you're an organic farmer, but how are we going to feed 9 billion people? And the reality is you can feed a lot more people if you stop throwing away food. And that, in fact, food insecurity has very little to do with the growing of food. Food insecurity is almost entirely political. And so there are enormous amounts of food in most of the countries where people are food insecure, but it's not getting to the right people. So about 2/3 of our food losses happen before the point of purchase. And so there are things that you can do yourself to adjust this. This is what happens when you work in a Mac and you try and export to PowerPoint. I even looked through it and it looked good earlier. So the first thing is expiration dates. There are almost no products that actually have, no food products that have an actual expiration date. They are use by, sell by, or best by dates. And so those do not mean that product is expired, or you should expect it to be expired, or you should expect it to be unhealthy at that point. Sell by means the grocery store should get it out of their store by that date, still expecting that it would last days at the consumer's residence before it's consumed. And so there's a misunderstanding here, and it's funny that 70% of people believe that by throwing away food that's expired, you're less likely to get a foodborne illness. But the reality is that the spoilage, if you're storing your produce and your dairy and your meat properly in the refrigerator, the spoilage that happen is not pathogenic to humans. It's not a disease. It may make it taste bad, but it's not going to give you, that's not E. coli that's doing that. E. coli doesn't consume meat for its food source, right? It wants to live inside your body, and the meat is just the way that it gets there. And so these are very different things. Spoilage and contamination are not the same. So in fact, and peanut butter, can last for basically ever. And so the oils may go rancid in it, but you can still eat it. And in fact, people eat plenty of products with rancid oil in it. Most of the olive oil in this country is rancid by the time it even gets here. And so people become accustomed to that. And so these aren't actually things that are gonna make you sick. They may bother you, but it doesn't mean you have to throw your food away. What happens when milk spoils? It turns into buttermilk and yogurt. Yeah, that's spoiled milk. And so those lactobacilli, the bacteria that's doing that work, are important for your stomach, right? Most of the bacteria and fungi that are doing spoilage are actually the same kind that live in your stomach and you need for healthy digestion. And so eating a little bit of spoiled food is not actually a bad thing. And we, at the farm, we try to eat some dirt a little bit too. So we don't, I'll pick a carrot right out of the ground, give it one rub, and you eat it, and you're getting a little bit of the same soil bacteria that are digesting organic material in the soil, just like they would help your stomach. Next is unnecessary standards for quality. Grocery stores are very specific because they want to sell as much as they can, and I understand that desire. But some of that's been misplaced. And so you can see the grade tolerances for tomatoes there at the top. So grade 1 has to be fairly well formed, fairly smooth. What does that even mean? What's the difference between fairly smooth and reasonably smooth? I don't know. But someone went to school for years to find out what that means, and now they tell farmers what it means. And so sun scald absolutely has no effect on the safety or flavor of your tomato. Just means that too many UV rays were hitting the skin on the tomato, and it developed a little bit of a protective coating there. And so perfectly safe to eat, easily trimmed off and thrown away if it bothers you, but those tomatoes are not accepted by the grocery store. And if I put a pallet of produce in a refrigerated truck and ship it to Austin for Whole Foods, and then they ship it back to Houston, to the Whole Foods here in Houston, but if I ship it to Austin to Whole Foods and they say, hey, actually you didn't meet grade, then that pallet is done. And it's just going to end up in the compost. By the time that it's sat on the truck for a couple of days, there's no way for us to move it somewhere else. So also post-harvest, so we do some grading ourselves. We do grading for rotting because we want to give someone a product that's going to last in their refrigerator. But even then, we should be partnered up, and we aren't yet, but we should be partnered up with food processors who we can send those products to, and they can trim them and still use them. Lack of motivation. There's a study last year, 53% of people know that food waste is a problem and they don't like it, but they also don't think they're going to change their habits. And so when Steve asked me to do this talk, I was like, yeah, we can come up with a bunch of great things to talk about here. And I came across this statistic and I said, well, what do you say to that? You know, we should all care a little bit more, and that's all we can say. But hopefully by reading in Drawdown and seeing that this is the number 3 item, people will recognize that this is in fact something important to do. Convenience and variety, right? People want papayas in New York City in January, and they're going to get them now with our food system. But shipping a papaya from Hawaii or Central America to New York inevitably is going to lead to significant amounts of spoilage. It also leads to inferior fruit because you're having to pick earlier and let them ripen on the way. People want the same produce year round. So if I can't have beets for you in August, then you'll find your beets from somewhere in the world that can, or you'll buy beets that have been stored in a cooler all summer long. So what can we actually do on the day-to-day to make some changes here? First is ignore those expiration dates and trust your senses. Again, you're not going to get sick. If you open the container of milk and you're like, is it bad or isn't it bad? It's not bad. Or taste it and then maybe it will be bad and you'll know. But it's probably not bad. Usually, if it's really spoiled, you can absolutely tell with no doubt. But it's also not an instantaneous change. It happens over time. Buy ugly vegetables. There are movements in Europe and Australia to include those cosmetically undesirable vegetables into our food supply, and Whole Foods is now trialing with a company, they may be called Ugly Vegetables, in the Pacific Northwest Whole Foods region, is now offering the best looking tomatoes and then the Ugly Vegetables tomato version at a little bit of a discount. But it's helping to reduce waste. And I think they're doing like 15% cheaper for that. So you can save some money there too. Shop local. If you're buying from local farms, then you're buying produce that was harvested sooner, shipped less of a distance, stored and cooled, in a cooler for less time. Eat seasonal. Be happy to accept that we have seasons and different produce is available at different times of year. Shop smart and become kitchen efficient. This was a big one that came up multiple times in the different studies I looked through, was just learn how to use produce and not throw it away. So that may mean meal prepping on Sunday afternoon, pre-cooking things, getting them ready to go so that you're not wasting through the week. And then absolutely, and where many of you can make a big difference here on a larger scale, is grow food at home. And so let's get more people growing food at home. And for those of you that are architects and engineers that are doing design work and encouraging people to do that, build it into your systems. Encourage people to grow some of their own food at home. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Scott. So, now we're going to try to get Pat Greer's presentation up here. There she is. So, Pat, it's when trying to introduce Pat, she just does such a fantastic job with it, because all she has to do is talk about what she does, and so I'm going to let her do that. Okay? I know it sounds like I'm being lame, but you're going to appreciate it. Go ahead, Pat.
Just a lot of serious talk about food, right? I mean, here in the world, what we hear, what we read, there's a lot of information. So when Drawdown came out and a plant-rich diet was in the top 5, I was like, yeah, that really works. We know that. That's something I can talk about. That's something I can do. It's something we do. And I found it fascinating to just start looking at some of the research out there and what people have been doing, and then knowing that we've been doing this for a couple decades, couple decades, and now there's like studies on it. There's people that are spending lots of dollars and time with all of this information. And it can be as simple as we want it to be. A plant-rich diet doesn't mean stopping what you're doing. This is not about the V word, vegan, vegetarian. This is about incorporating more plants in your diet. If you become a vegan, great. If you stay an omnivore, great. Pay attention to where all of your food is coming from and how you feel when you consume it. I grew up with a garden at my grandmother's, at my parents'. My dad had orchard in the backyard, and I grew up with that, and I thought, well, this is just the way it's supposed to be in the world. So as I left home and had my own garden and started really learning what it took to have my own food and then what to do with it. My family also, I'm old enough, I have silver hair in here, that we didn't throw anything away. When Scott was talking about food waste, I'm like, well, that's what we did. We don't throw anything away. And so we incorporate that in our business. We try and figure out what to do with everything. And incorporating plant-rich diet into your lifestyle can be as easy as you love a cookbook, you figure out how to make a meat dish into a vegetable dish. Or you cut meat out 1 day a week, or 3 days a week, or as many days a week as you can. The amount of protein that is consumed in the world is about 60% often higher than what the body actually needs. The United States is the highest consumer of animal proteins in the world. And it's not surprising. I mean, we can get meat pretty cheap, I think, these days. Some of it's expensive. I mean, you go to Wagyu and all that, and that's just like out of sight. They sell it by the ounce. A carrot, on the other hand, is a lot less expensive. You can grow a lot more carrots for what you can grow a cow for. You can grow lots of vegetables for what you can grow a cow for. And you can just make your increments in reasonable portions. So, how do you incorporate a plant-rich diet? Steve, I have no idea how to do a PowerPoint. What do you do? Oh, that's just way too easy.
Well, wait, first we have to put that, okay. There.
So, wonder. Do you wonder about where your food comes from? This child is in complete and total wonder. She made caps for her fingers out of raspberries. How delightful is that? And then she ate them. And it was just the most wonderful thing to see. So when we wonder about our food, it's a gift. Scott was talking about growing food here in Houston. This was a temperature gauge that I had at the farmer's market at Rice about 3 years ago. So under our tent, it was 116 degrees, and on the pavement, I put the probe out, and it was 150, 149 degrees. Houston grows, we can grow here year-round, and it can be difficult at times. So as we talk about eating locally, getting more plant-rich diet into our systems, how do we do that when it's 150 degrees on the asphalt? Well, we think about different ideas. We go back to the wonder, to the raspberries on your fingers, or to wearing a carrot suit when things are so serious. If cattle were their own nation, they would be the world's third largest emitter of greenhouse gases, and that's from Drawdown. That's edited by Paul Hawken. And that's an enormous statistic for me. So when we're thinking about shifting our diets into a sustainable food future, the World Resource Institute says this is what they recommend. We reduce our overconsumption of calories. In the United States and in a lot of first world countries, a lot of calories are consumed, and they're empty. When we think about a real food, it's a carrot, it's a tomato, it's something that actually came off of a vine or off of a bush. What potato chips are processed food, obviously, things that are, taken and then adulterated in some form or fashion. And I love potato chips. Potato chips are great. We've got pita chips in the back. It's a wonderful thing in small quantities. Reduce our overconsumption of protein by reducing consumption of animal-based foods. Reduce consumption of beef specifically. It takes a lot of money to grow a cow and a lot of resources. So it may not be, I don't imagine that that'll ever end in our world. I imagine that people will be wanting a good steak at times, and cutting back on that would encourage people to grow more vegetables, to have them more accessible and easily accessible. In Belo Horizonte in Brazil, they got the government together with the growers and actually got their organic produce to be the same price or lower than conventional produce. Those are things that we can look at. And if we're consuming more vegetables, it's going to be easier for legislators to actually work on food policy, change things for all of us. How then do we, well, you don't want to look at all that. There's all kinds of statistics. We grow a lot of our own food. We have a garden at home that used to be a swimming pool. We filled the pool in, punched holes in the bottom, and it became a garden. This is some of our kale. This is a couple years ago. It's 4 years old, and people say you can't grow kale for 4 years, but we do. We have collard greens that are 3 years old right now. The freeze will knock them out every now and then, some will make it and some of them won't. You're eating some of the collard greens tonight that we grow, and some of the pesto is from our garden too. We're at the end of that. I had to purchase some just the other day, but basil we'll get at least 8 months out of. We grow our own sprouts. Sprouts are a real wonderful source of protein, whether it's sunflower sprouts, sunflower greens, or lentils. There's all kinds of ways that you can get a lot of protein, legumes. So this is talking about taking what we have and making something with it in a plant-rich diet. We had prickly pears, and a huge abundance of prickly pears at the farm that HC has just north of here in Groesbeck. So I figured out what to do with prickly pears. It was an interesting experience. We made kombucha out of them. It was a lot of fun and exquisite color and delightful to drink. This is a peach cobbler, and it's actually a raw dish. There's peaches and blackberries in there, and they all came from the farmer's market. Fun to grow, incredible to eat, and it just took a little bit of thought to take something that I grew up with peach cobbler in the South, in East Texas, and we had this delightful flaky crust and lots of sugar, and it just kind of made my face hurt when I ate it. And people would always go to sleep after they ate all these delightful desserts. So what do you do different? You just start cutting back on the sugar to where it's comfortable, and then you experiment with some other crusts. So the crust here happens to be dates and pecans. We have pecans grown locally that are wonderful. How do you do that on a day-to-day basis? Part of it is paying attention to not only where your food is coming from, but what you're doing with it at home. There's so many ways that we can take any item that we grew up with, green bean casserole. My parents always made green bean casserole. It was always a little strange to me. It was a can of cream of mushroom soup. I think it was canned green beans. It was just all this dumping of things. And once you experience having something fresh, once you experience a fresh green bean, it changes your life. That sounds like a big statement, but it can change your life when you stop and think about what you can do with something that's just fresh and grown and hasn't been in a can and shipped all over the country. Emitting greenhouse gas is more than just a peach. It's the peach in a can that got shipped from somewhere else. It's fruit that comes from South America, so we can have it year-round. We get used to those things. We started a food co-op here in Houston, and we carried a lot of things, but because people eat onions all the time, they eat potatoes all the time, and we don't have them all the time here. So we carried them, but very quickly we decided not to get those from any place but the United States and get it as close to Texas as we could. And of course, we worked with a lot of local farmers to where we had constant produce supply of what was local, and we shared recipes. If you turn around and ask any one person in the room what they do with bok choy, with cabbage, they may have a different recipe that came from a family member. And that can be something you can incorporate. Whatever recipe you get, it's just a guideline. You may not like garlic in your coleslaw. You may like sage in your coleslaw, but you got to experiment with it. So it goes back to the raspberries on your fingers as caps. When you wonder about something, it changes your life in a way that will change generations. Because everything we do right now will absolutely change what's happening next. And I think that's what we're all here for. What's going to happen next? What can we do to alter next? Because all we have is right now. And it seems like a stretch. Okay, next, now, what do we do? You have to decide. We can give up, crawl under the table, compost ourselves, or we can figure out what to do with a carrot. Make a carrot dog. Just grill a carrot. It's delicious. You put the same stuff on there, you put it in a bun, and it's just different. And then people will really talk about you. And that can be kind of fun. So, these are just some things that we do. These are cucumber slices with our pesto party cheese on top. We call it cheese instead of cheese. It's a cashew-based cheese, something kind of fun. Even Tom will eat it. It's just really it was something fun that we could do. Fresh basil out of the garden. This was actually a lunch that we served here at the Green Building Resource Center. It was a summer salad and a summer soup. Angela's up, look, there's a carrot, strawberries. So save the planet, eat your veggies. That's kind of the basis of it all. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Pat. All right, so I'd like to read one more thing from the book before we go to our panel and ask questions. But this was really a nice piece from Paul Hawken. Unquestionably, distress signals are flashing throughout nature and society, from drought, sea level rise, and unrelenting increases in temperatures to expanded refugee crises, conflict, and dislocation. This is not the whole story. We have endeavored in Drawdown to show that many people are staunchly and unwaveringly on the case. Although carbon emissions from fossil fuel combustion and land use have a 2-century head start on these solutions, we will take those odds. The buildup of greenhouse gases we experience today occurred in the absence of human understanding. Our ancestors were innocent of the damage they were doing. That can tempt us to believe that global warming is something that is happening to us, that we are victims of a fate that was determined by actions that precede us. If we change the preposition and consider that global warming is happening for us, an atmospheric transformation that inspires us to change and reimagine everything we make and do, we begin to live in a different world. We take 100% responsibility and stop blaming others. We see global warming not as an inevitability, but as an invitation to build, innovate, and affect change, a pathway that awakens creativity, compassion, and genius. This is not a liberal agenda, nor is it a conservative agenda, one. This is the human agenda. Paul Hawken. All right, so with that, and I'll start monkeying around with the mic so we can give it to our speakers here. But do we have any questions from the audience? Yeah, go ahead.
Is the Trump administration going to go ahead with the changes in the refrigerant law? Or are they going to back off from it? I mean, I just saw a news article from July that they were going, did they actually go ahead and going to comply with Kigali international law?
Okay, so that's kind of a tough one. So you didn't quite, you're not up on that?
No.
Okay. All right. You're forgiven. All right. Nancy?
I was hopeful reading Paul Hawken's book that we're talking about some kind of non-toxic refrigerant or less toxic, or at least one whose escape would not be a severe problem. I believe there are refrigerators that operate on ammonia. Is anything like that in the offing for large-scale refrigeration, that they could be, the gas could be something that we don't worry too much if it gets out?
Okay. Nancy was asking, for those of you in the back, she read in Drawdown that there are some new refrigerants or some old refrigerants that are much less, a danger to the greenhouse gas situation. And so what are those? And is that looking like a kind of a reality?
I can answer that.
Well, but I want our speakers to answer that, so thanks, Nan. Got any news on what's coming up in the refrigerant world?
So I guess I can use this. So, the new, okay, let me back it up. The old refrigerants, the EPA said, more specifically right now, R22 has been produced in a majority of the systems that are being used. And so that is being phased out. They're in 2020, the phasing out process has already started, and by 2020 there would be no more importing or producing of that specific refrigerant type. So what that is doing is there are new refrigerant types that are being produced and made that are replacing the old refrigerant types. So yes, to answer your question, they are replacing those, and that's some of the work that we're doing with the grocery stores in assisting them in taking out that refrigerant and destroying it for them, and so that they can replace the refrigerants with the new non-as harmful refrigerant types. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, in fact, on that note, I was talking to an architect friend of mine, actually Monday, who does a lot of grocery stores, and that's already in progress. They've got the little tanks up there. I think they're ammonia driven or something like that, and no, or CO2. Anyway, I can't remember, but that's already starting to happen. Next question. Yes, back there. Yes.
My sister and I are fixing to build a house together, and it's going to be a 4-bedroom, 28 feet by 48 feet, just a plain old rectangle. What's the smart way to heat and cool a new construction house?
Well, let's see. The strategy number 33 is insulation. So make sure that you keep the heat out and the cool in this climate. And, if you're up north, then keep the cold out and the heat in. And you can eat Galveston County. Great. So you can, I don't know if you were directing that. That doesn't sound like a food question. That wasn't a wind turbine question or a refrigerant question, though, right?
Well, I just heard there's a smarter refrigerant for grocery stores, so I didn't know
Right.
if that sort of leads to housing.
Well, it's coming, so stay tuned. Okay, another question. Yes, sir.
No, my question, and maybe is for everybody on the panel, or maybe for you. First of all, congratulations to organize this meeting. But the other day, Maria and I, we went to see Al Gore in Rice, and at the end of the conference, when Al Gore was leaving, there was an old man in the top of the theater and shout something like, "What about the growth of the population?" I think I saw in your pie what this guy is trying to do is an absolute drawdown, no, a drawdown, pardon my accent, drawdown per capita. When Michael and I, when we born, the population was barely 3,000 million people. Now, we are young, we are very nice looking guys, and the population has duplicated. Pat was saying that it takes a lot of resources to grow a cow, but certainly it takes a village and much more resources to grow a kid. And in your pie, in the last slide, there was something called family planning and girl education. But why we never talk about this? I mean, and it's for all the panelists. Why don't we have the energy guy, we have the refrigeration guy, we have the food.
Okay, I'll take that one. I'll take that one. Right. Basically, since in America, right, we like the gold medal, the silver medal, and the bronze medal, right? And I needed to keep this kind of in a 2-hour format, so I took the top 4. Okay. Now, 6 and 7 is educating girls and family planning. And he points out in the book that when you add those up, that is the biggest piece of the pie. So he kind of separated them because there were some nuances there, and he kind of wanted to explore that. But, you know, you've nailed it, right? The population is an issue.
Always left behind. That topic is never included in any environmental sustainability, any sort of panel or educational piece or book or movie. It's always left behind.
Okay.
That's what I'm curious
All right. So I'll tell you what I'll do. How about maybe February? I'll do Drawdown the next 4. What do you think of that? Okay. And we'll get 6 and 7 will be in that. Okay. So we'll do 5, 6, 7, and 8. Does that sound good? All right. Okay. So February, you know, Valentine's Day, we'll go ahead and try to fit that in and see what happens, because that's a very good conversation. And, you know, I'm sorry I couldn't get to all of it because there's like 100 strategies. Can't do it.
I do have a suggestion on that, on educating girls and about population. About population, we have a very fortunate piece in our lives, and we have someone that's in the United Nations, and I brought it up, and I said, why isn't our population at the top of the list, around the world? And it is being discussed. So my suggestion is that you speak to your legislators, to your legislators, to the Senate, to anyone that will listen to you about this, because education is a huge piece. And if you read that in the book, the statistics are absolutely astounding at what can happen. So talk to everyone about that.
Okay.
Yeah, just a comment back. I was on a panel at Rice University, and I brought out to the audience that the best dollar impact for reducing global warming is sponsoring family planning for any woman who wants it, to reduce pregnancies. This was an Indian concerned scientist studying way back when they were examining the Kyoto Protocol.
Okay, Tim was affirming that he was at a talk and affirmed that that is definitely a major issue. Okay.
You have a question?
Yes.
You and I have been around long enough that we've seen the so-called Pacalov wedges. We've seen Al Gore's Our Choice. And this is somewhat the latest iteration, and I'm very enthusiastic about it. I got on board 4 or 5 years ago and said, follow these folks, this is important. But what is the sense that this is going to be more impactful than those other 2 examples or others that we have seen? How do we get it out wider? What's our cause for optimism?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if there's a panelist that wants to take that one on. You want to try that, Scott?
Yeah. First, I would say, so the question was, this is the 4th or 5th iteration of the same concept, going back to Al Gore and others. And so what makes this one different? What's the cause for optimism? And so I would say first, like Steve put up, I think, a slide from the book early on, but we saw the same 6 things that you need to do over and over and over again from people. And I certainly don't have the same history that a lot of people here do in this movement, but I would say that this is a different list of things, and it's a very concrete list of things, putting numbers that people are, trusting on here, saying this is the change. And he's not necessarily saying, like, if we do this thing, here's what'll happen. He's kind of saying, this is where I see this going. Like, it's already moving here, and these are the numbers that are going to happen by this date. And so I think there's optimism from him that a lot of these things are actually already happening. And so maybe it's a little less, the book read to me a little bit less than a lot of the other books, as less of a like, the sky is falling and here's what we have to do to save ourselves, and more of like a hopeful, look into the future. And so maybe that mindset, I think that mindset will speak stronger, at least to my generation, of like, we're looking forward in positivity to what we're expecting to see. And so those are just a few kind of small things maybe about it that will do it.
Scott mentioned his generation. And when we look at generations of things, when we look at I'm going to talk about it in a food, we do like generation food. A tomato at the beginning of the week is going to become a sauce that's going to become a salad dressing that then's going to be frozen possibly and then used in crackers. So when we look at generations, things just get better or change. They just have different iterations. So like Scott, I found this far more positive than the sky is falling. So that's my thought.
So I would add that on the energy side, there is some, I wouldn't say optimism or cause for optimism, but carbon emissions in the electric power sector have dropped by double-digit percentages in the United States in the last 20 years. That's largely because we burn a lot less coal, and we use a lot more renewables, and we use more natural gas. And those reductions are, those are meaningful, and the technology improvements on the renewable energy side are very real. And we don't really know what the uptake numbers will be with respect to electric vehicles, but this phenomena of sort of adaptation of new technologies is actually not terribly well understood, but sometimes you just reach a shift and then everything kind of shifts as opposed to just a curve of adaptation. So I'm optimistic on that account. The other, and I'm a developer of projects, so you kind of have to be optimistic by nature, but the other thing that we're seeing in the electric power sector is many major corporations are setting forth and adapting renewable energy consumption goals. So General Motors wants all their manufacturing processes to be driven by clean energy. Microsoft, Google, Facebook, those General Mills, et cetera, et cetera. Walmart has similar goals. And those goals that these companies many of them are really trying to follow through on them, are moving the needle on the electric power side. And normally, electric power utilities are not the most creative or adaptive organizations in the world, but they're being pushed by their customers to move in different directions. So there's a lot of things out of Washington that one can get really discouraged about, but there are other things happening. California, for example, will move to 100% clean energy standard probably in the next session. And right now there are gas pipelines to California. We will never build a new natural gas pipeline to California. And that's probably bad for Houston because we build those things. But we will not build any more of those because in fact, gas consumption is going down because people are using more and more renewable energy. So there are bright spots out there if you're feeling discouraged about the latest tweet.
Yes.
I heard a question about renewables globally. So it seems that countries that are not as rich as the first world countries are really embracing renewable energies because they don't have a grid, they don't have an infrastructure. So if they go right to solar or right to wind, it's going to be a win for them, and then they don't have to buy power from a country that has fossil fuels. So my question is, if we are not embracing this as much as some other countries, are we going to be
Okay, Lisa was asking if the United States insists on not taking the lead in these renewable technologies and adoption of, like Michael was talking about, then are we not just resigning ourselves to following other countries' lead? Is that fair?
Yeah, so, and the other part of the question was with respect to distributed energy solutions, so if you're not connected to the grid because you live in an isolated place or a village somewhere that's not electrified. I actually don't think that, I know people like to draw the analogy between cell phones, that people skip over landlines and go straight to cell phones, and will that happen with the grid? I don't think that's likely. The grid is actually not that expensive, and it gives you phenomenal reliability. So if you're a village in somewhere, you're going to have a tough time getting enough power to power your village from solar panels, and then you're going to have some phenomenal batteries behind that. So I think grid-connected solutions continue to make a lot of sense and will for quite some time. And then in terms of the argument around U.S. competitiveness, there is, on the solar manufacturing side, we just don't manufacture solar. We do build a lot of wind turbines and manufacture them here in the United States, largely because the Chinese government has subsidized to the tune of $100+ billion the solar panel industry. That's a pretty big number. And what's happening is in the sort of full OECD countries, as they've adapted a lot of renewable energy, that has brought costs down, which makes solutions more feasible for lower income countries, which is a very positive thing in my view. Are we going to get left behind? We could do with a lot more leadership, but we are, this country has, if you thought, like, what would you want in a low carbon energy, sort of superpower? What's the thing that the Trump administration is talking about? Energy something or other. What's the tagline? Don't we have any, does anybody watch Fox News around here? It's it's some variation of America First, but around energy. And I got to remember, I'll remember in a second. But anyhow, if you take that concept and say, I want our country to be the low carbon energy superpower, you'd have a hard time coming up with a geography better than ours. We have fantastic wind, we have fantastic solar resources, we have good geothermal, we have lots of biomass possibilities, and we have a tremendous abundance of natural gas, which is a low, it's a transitional fuel, but it's dramatically lower carbon than natural gas. So if you said, all right, I'm going to go compete on my ability to generate a lot of economic activity with a low carbon footprint, we are tremendously lucky geographically. And the only other countries that sort of come close, and I'm looking at Javier to see if he agrees, is probably Brazil and maybe some places in East Africa. And a couple places, maybe like Costa Rica, Nicaragua, where they have like every renewable resource you could ever want. But we have a phenomenal amount of renewable energy resources that we can tap here in the United States.
I would add just one thing, that since Trump is a president, I have seen much more. We are in the sector, in the renewable energy sector, and the interest has grown. This country is so big and so great that it's not what guys say in Washington. I mean, it's a complete amount of cities, companies, corporations, and it has produced the contrary effect in the market. There's more interest than during Obama.
Okay, another question. Go ahead, Richard.
As we rebuild from Hurricane Harvey, what do you recommend for refrigeration? What do you recommend as far as wind turbines? What do you recommend we can do? We've got an opportunity, a clean slate down here. if you're an artist instead of a scientist, because you got the scientific background, what would you say we need to create down here so that we can not only help the people out, but also sustain them for 30, 50 years? Does that make sense? We got an opportunity. What would you suggest for refrigeration, wind, edible resources, and food?
Okay, let's just start over here with, what do you see for managing refrigerants?
It's probably more of an engineer type question, but as far as what I've seen personally being out in the field, right now you have a clean slate, like you said, the damage is done. As far as refrigeration goes, now's the time to start replacing those harmful HFCs with the non-harmful, environmental friendly refrigerant types. That really would be my personal input. I'm not I don't have a big background in the refrigeration field, so that would be the best I can answer your question.
Okay.
This isn't really a wind energy answer, but I think in the wake of Harvey, I mean, we're in the permit, what is this called, the Permit Resource Center? Houston Permitting Center. So what they do in this building is they make sure that the city, the people who build things in the city follow a bunch of oftentimes inane land use rules. So if you want to build a building in Houston, you have to build a whole bunch of parking to go with it. If you want to build near a road, you have to do a big setback. So we have a whole bunch of rules that basically codify sprawl. And the folks in this room, I'm sure many of them don't agree with these rules, but their job is to enforce all these rules, which make us more prone to flooding, because we have we make it against, density is basically against the law in Houston, and that causes us to have to build massive freeways like we're about to do with a huge expansion of I-45. So sorry, I just couldn't resist but get that in there. But I think if you said, what do we do post-Harvey? I think we ought to look at that opportunity to change rules that really date from the 1950s. There's nobody that really thinks they're a good idea, but they're on the books.
All right, well, I am going to say that the city of Houston just got the EPA, Partner of the Year award for buying the most, renewable energy for RECs. We have some kind of relationship with a solar farm in Alpine that we've sponsored that. So I think the mayor is trying to at least show some leadership with that. So everything we can do to encourage people to do the right thing is what we need to do. And I certainly have no problem with Michael throwing that out there, so that's okay. Scott?
Obviously, or maybe not obviously, agricultural land that is well managed absorbs far more rainfall than does concrete or poorly managed soils or your typical sod lawn. So incorporating agriculture into development is a big part of this. There's a new master plan community in Fort Bend County called Harvest Green, and we manage a farm for them. There's a 12-acre farm in the process of getting its organic certification that will basically serve as a huge water sink. We're actually surrounded by the detention ponds for the neighborhood, and so, but we'll be a part of that kind of absorbing moisture. So I think incorporating agriculture into projects can help a lot. Also, shout out for the local food system. It's very important and critical. We had grocery stores with nothing in it, and we had a number of farmers with a whole bunch of stuff they had to harvest all at once, and we couldn't connect the consumers to fix the problem for either organization. And so we had a lot of food that went wasted in the hurricane. And frankly, most of your farmers lost all their crops in the hurricane, or at least like 80–90%. So if you are taking part in the local food scene, thank you, and please keep doing it. If you're not, please consider, hitting up a farmer's market or buying some stuff from Pat, because she works with all the local farmers in town.
Grow what you eat what you grow, learn how to cook. Teach a niece, teach a nephew, teach our children. There's an education process that's been lost. It's like 2 generations of people don't know how to cook. And it's sad to me that people don't know, what to do with bok choy. It was fun to see bok choy at the market on Saturday and be able to purchase it and say, now what am I going to do with it? And that's what you have wrapped around your smashed potato tonight with pesto. And that's simple. So simple food and truly knowing what is available and figuring out what to do with it. Food can be so intimidating. You go to a restaurant and these fancy names and there's these for a simple dish. And when you dissect that and see it's really simple, it's fun. Food can be fun.
All right, well, thank you, Pat. On that note, that was the last question. It's 8 o'clock, sorry, we're over. I know somebody's dying to ask, but I'm dying to give away a copy of Drawdown, okay? So I'm gonna ask the carrot person to go ahead and pick one of these.
How did you get an entry?
Yeah, if you signed in and saw this, drawdown. Oh, I'm so sorry, because there it was. Yeah, it was right next to it. So anyway, Katie Donovan, is that it? Is there a Katie Donovan? So here you have to be present to win, and so she's here, and. All right, how about a hand for Katie? And I want to thank you all so much for coming. The next education seminar, we're going to take November off, and then December the 6th, back to the Wednesday night, we're going to have a kind of a green holiday. What is the gift? What are some green gifts? So I've got a couple of great speakers. It's going to be a kind of a fun thing. We're going to re-examine. And it's not like nobody's ever read anything about this, but we'll have a session here on thoughtful things we can do for gifts over the holidays that might have a lighter footprint. So with that, thanks for coming, everybody. That's our Drawdown program, and it's a wrap.